It's been 1 year since Taliban fighters closed in on Kabul, taking control of Afghanistan's capital as the president fled the country. Thousands of Afghans, many who worked with the U.S. and its allies, made their way to the Kabul airport in fear for their lives, desperate to flee. The U.S. military evacuated more than 130,000 people over the next 2 weeks, but not everyone got out alive. ISIS suicide bombers killed 13 U.S. service members and more than 170 Afghans in a coordinated attack at the airport. Now the Taliban is celebrating the first anniversary of its victory as the country faces an uncertain future. ABC News chief foreign correspondent Ian Pannell is in Kabul with more.
America's old enemy celebrating what they call Independence Day here on the streets of Kabul. It's exactly 1 year since the militants took control of the capital and the country.
These are the fighters that America spent 20 years trying to defeat. Today, they're celebrating America's withdrawal and their assumption of power here.
The scene on the ground, a stark contrast from a year ago as US forces withdrew, ending America's longest war. Today, it's Taliban soldiers patrolling the streets, many of them with US-made weapons. But most Afghans aren't on the streets celebrating. They're mourning the loss of jobs, money, or any place in society. This weekend, a small group of brave Afghan women taking to the streets, calling for bread and freedom. But this is the Taliban's response. Gunfire into the air and some female protesters beaten. I sat down with a Taliban spokesman who denies women and girls are being oppressed.
Women are being given their rights. Each society interprets rights of human beings, men, women, children, neighbors, the planet, animals, differently.
But this is the image to remember today. Not the Taliban celebrating, but babies dying from hunger. More than 90% of Afghans no longer have enough to eat. And it's the youngest and weakest struggling to survive in the new Afghanistan. 1 year after America's withdrawal lapsed into chaos, 1 year since the Taliban's victory, Afghanistan is isolated, sadder and hungrier than ever.
And let's bring in our chief foreign correspondent, Ian Pannell from Kabul. Ian, good to see you, friend. I know that many Afghans were able to seek refuge in other parts of the world, including some here in the U.S. How are Afghans that couldn't leave doing today?
Yeah, I mean, I think by almost every key metric, Afghans are not doing well. All the dire predictions about what could happen after the government collapsed, after the army collapsed and the Taliban took power, have pretty much come to pass, perhaps even worse than many people feared. I mean, more than 90% of the country effectively living in poverty. More than 90% of the country is having difficulty feeding itself. Many people are having to live off one meal a day. And we saw the images there in that maternity and children's hospital of hundreds and hundreds of babies who are essentially suffering from severe malnutrition. And those are just the ones who kind of get into the hospital. What the hospital says is that there are many more children waiting to be admitted. And of course, many of them can't make their way to the capital where they technically have the best facilities. They're stuck out in more remote areas. So the situation is dire and aid agencies are worried about what happens when winter comes. So you've got the hunger, you've got the poverty and starvation for some people. And the other side of it is the lack of rights to 50% of the population. All women and girls in this country have lost out. Women have been denied access to jobs. Girls, certainly high school age, have been denied access to education. We're seeing increasing numbers of street kids out trying to earn enough money to try and feed their own families. Some of them are as young as 3 or 4 years old. And although the Taliban are out on the streets today celebrating, for most Afghans, today is a day of mourning. Kenneth?
Yeah, definitely. And Ian, on that humanitarian aid, is the U.S. providing any support at all? And if not, are they expected to?
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of key issues here. One is that the money that belonged to the Afghan government, tens and tens of billions of dollars, was frozen after the Taliban took power. And that was instituted by the United States and others. And there hasn't been easing up of that. What the Taliban government say is that money belongs to Afghans and should be released. But yes, there is aid coming in. According to the latest figures from USAID, the United States is the single largest humanitarian donor in Afghanistan, providing more than $770 million in assistance in Afghanistan, but it's not just for the country, it's also for Afghans in the region. Of course, we saw quite so many fled, many living as refugees, as displaced people, and some of that money is also going there. And after the June earthquake, again, the United States providing around 55 million in humanitarian assistance. But talk to any of the aid agencies here and they say it just isn't enough, not just from the United States, but from the international community, and they really fear about what this winter is going to bring.
Yeah, definitely. And Ian, I remember, your reporting, I watched it very closely on the ground a year ago, and now you're back there 1 year later. What differences do you see?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because on one level, Kabul, the streets are still busy. You still see the same markets. You still see the same traffic, the bikes, the cars on the road. But you don't have to scratch much to see what lies below the surface. For example, we were filming at this fruit and vegetable market, and each stall, each cart is laden high with beautiful fruit, bananas and oranges and peaches and grapes, or fresh vegetables. But then you notice there's almost no one buying, and that's because the unemployment figures here are expected to reach something in the region of 40% this year. So many Afghans, it's not about their ability to get food, it's their ability to be able to pay for it. And again, you see those security details driving around town, you see the checkpoints, which we've all become familiar with in the last 20 years. They realize it's the Taliban that are manning those checkpoints, many of them with American-made weapons. Again, we've always seen street kids out there in Kabul, shining shoes, selling gum, some just begging. But now the numbers are pretty staggering. Something in the region of 17,000 street kids are believed to be operating in Kabul at the moment. So, there are very clear signs that the trajectory of the country is going absolutely in the wrong direction. And there doesn't seem to be any realistic hope of trying to halt that decline.
And I know when it comes to women's rights, there are many women, many activists who don't see this as a day of victory. You sat down, Ian, I understand, with the spokesman from the Taliban government about and discussed women's rights. What stood out to you in that conversation?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I really tried to press him, and this is Abdul Kahar Balki. He's a spokesman for the Foreign Ministry, and he kept saying, well, the West shouldn't tell us what we should do. And I said, well, look, these are criticisms that I'm hearing from Afghans. We'd gone to a secret school, for example, where girls are having to get an education, basically hiding sometimes from their parents, from their neighbors, from their friends. And again, the teachers taking great risks to try and run them. But nevertheless, Abdul Balki, he insists that there is equality for women, despite all the evidence to the contrary. And we saw the protest over the weekend where women who dared to come out on the streets calling for bread and freedom, essentially the Taliban fired guns over their heads to disperse the crowd, and some of the women were beaten. This was a key question for me because I was at the first press conference last year, and then I asked him about what he said at that press conference and what his answer was now.
When I was here in August, I was with you at that very first press conference, and Zabihullah Mujahid told me, and you translated this, women will be afforded all their rights, whether it's at work or other activities. Women are a key part of society. We are guaranteeing their rights. Was that a lie?
Absolutely not.
So what happened?
Women are being given their rights, and just to expound on the matter, for the understanding of all sides concerned, each society interprets rights of human beings, men, women, children, neighbors, the planet, animals, differently. For example, the United States recently, the US Supreme Court passed a law banning abortions. We disagree with that from a religious perspective, but at the end of the day, it is the sovereign choice of the United States of what laws it enacts. What we're asking for is the same level of respect when it comes to our sovereign choices in terms of the laws and regulations that we enact in our country.
So in many ways, he's trying to have two arguments that appear contradictory. One is, yes, we've given women and girls all their rights, and secondly, don't tell us what we should do, how we should run our country, because we've got our own laws. And the reality is, for most women and girls, as I've said, is that they've lost out dramatically, and the future for them looks bleak.
Wow, just fascinating. And again, that official there using what's happening here in the U.S. as an example to make his point. Ian Pannell, thank you for your work there on the ground today and a year ago. We really appreciate it.
Well, hey there, GMA fans. Robin Roberts here. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Lots of great stuff here. So go on, click the subscribe button right over here to get more of awesome videos and content from GMA every day, anytime. We thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the morning on GMA.